Let's get into the market pulse with Kabelo Tshola. Kabelo, a very good evening and good to have you with us on the show.
Nosipho, a very good evening to you too as well. Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's get into it. We've seen then the recent PMI data from both the US and China pointing to a slowdown in manufacturing, likely linked to the earlier tariff pressures. Kabelo, with renewed talk of trade tensions between the two economies, are we likely to see market sentiment take a knock again, especially if things escalate beyond rhetoric?
Absolutely. I think certainly when you get a print that is on the lower end, certainly over the last 24 months, that being the Caixin manufacturing data, which is the Chinese essentially output of that economy, that declined below the key point of 50 points to register 48.3. Absolutely, I think you're spot on there. The tensions affect sentiment and affect productivity because, as you can imagine, when you're about to within 90 days know whether you're going to have 50 or a 40 or 120% tariff on your output, that has a significant bearing. So yes, I think going forward, and of course this will now not hopefully, but certainly reflect within the European numbers, with the latest being that aluminium and steel tariffs of up to 50%. That's the latest as at Friday.
Yeah.
So yes.
And they're set to kick in tomorrow, Kabelo, but there are attempts then, of course, to prevent this from happening. But if they do go through then, how will they affect the global economy?
Look, I think we're talking about supply chains here, and the recent release by the OECD basically stating that it is anticipated that global GDP is going to contract estimated to about 2.9% from the previous 3.2%. I think that's spot on, and I think the risk is possibly to the downside, where you could get underperformance from there, a lower print for the year, because no one really actually knows what's going to transpire next week or within a month or at the end of the 90-day period.
Yeah. So let's look then at the local currency, Kabelo. The rand is holding around 17.90 to the US dollar. Talk to us about how vulnerable is the currency to global volatility, especially the renewed US-China trade tensions.
It constantly is vulnerable. It is well traded globally. Others would tell you it is the go-to currency on risk-on sentiment, so you'll see it completely reflecting the underlying mood, but I think that has suddenly started to diminish somewhat as key outputs from our economy start to run quite nicely. We're talking about platinum above $1,000. We're talking about gold approaching that $3,500 an ounce level. So I think those are certainly not to be avoided in the impact that they have on the current strengthening or the strength that we see in the rand at this particular point. But generally, the one thing that's certain is we're in for extreme volatility.
So let's take a look then at the local bourse, the JSE. How did we start the day and how did we end?
Yes, so we remained weak throughout the trading day, eventually finishing 0.3% down on the top 40, as well as the all-share index, even though the industrials, as to be expected, tried to stage a recovery or outperformance. In fact, they were one of the few sectors that were up 0.44%. Resources, because when we closed, a few of the key commodities hadn't started to move, or in fact from yesterday the likes of gold had retraced or had taken a pause. So the resource sector, I beg your pardon, was the biggest loser, dropping by 2.2%.
So let's get a look then at what we're seeing with the commodities. Take us through what we're seeing with gold prices.
Yes, so as mentioned there, having had a very big run the day before today, on the back of, announcements the prior trading session, the U.S. close, that being of the potential doubling of aluminium and steel duties to the European area up to 50%. So if you can imagine vehicle prices, vehicle manufacturing in Europe, basically at risk of an additional 50% tariff on their inputs, that puts a damper on things. So the gold price did take a breather, and it took a breather today after a very strong run yesterday, and as to be expected. But I think the wind is still firmly in its sail to go higher.
All right. So let's get into some company news, Kabelo. Tongaat Hewlett announces leadership changes amid business rescue.
Indeed, really, this is just an update on some key appointments. A gentleman by the name of Gavin Dalgleish, who was CFO, ascending to the throne at this particular point, a chartered accountant by profession, really being brought in to try and execute on the turnaround strategy under the business rescue practitioners. So he's been appointed there, and there have been a few other appointments to the board to try and stabilize the sugar business.
And then we'll wrap up then with British American Tobacco expects revenue to grow between 1% and 2%.
Indeed, those might look like pretty small numbers, but when you're moving a 1.3 trillion rand company, they move the needle quite a bit. So yes, BTI releasing some data there and an update. Revenue, as you mentioned, expected to rise between 1% and 2%. It's multiple moving parts, certainly within the combustible side. We're talking the Lucky Strikes, the natural American Spirit brands showing, so they were up, but the combustible sector as a whole down 9% year to date. The nicotine pouches, another segment, gaining market share, particularly in the U.S. and out in Canada. Another segment there, which is the vapes, are under significant pressure on the back of illicit flows. Again, particularly in those markets out in North America. But generally, I think the company is trading at reasonable multiples, trading at a historic PE of about 24 and a very attractive dividend yield of 9.4%. So those were the numbers out of British American Tobacco today.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Kabelo, thank you so much for taking us through the market pulse.
Thank you very much, Nosipho. Keep well.
You too. All right. That was Kabelo Tshola, Portfolio Manager at FNB Wealth and Investments, taking us through the market pulse this evening.